Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com workshop, brought to you by Techstrong. My name is Cody J. Brown, and I will be moderating today's session. We have an exciting presentation ahead of us, but before we begin, I have just a few housekeeping notes. Today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the discussion, it will be made available to rewatch. You'll receive an email after the webinar concludes with a link to access the on-demand. We encourage discussion by using the chat tab. Let us know your thoughts, comments, suggestions, or just say a quick hello. Please make sure you check out the resources in the handouts panel. The presentation for today is available for download. And finally, at the end of today's webinar, we have a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. Stick around to see if you're one of our 4 lucky winners today. Kicking off today's webinar, the topic is how to tame your cloud services logs. And I'm joined today by George Hamilton, Director of Product Marketing for ChaosSearch, and Brian Bost, Pre-Sales Engineer for ChaosSearch. George and Brian, thank you so much for being here with us today. And at this point in time, I will turn the floor over to George to get us kicked off.
Hey everyone, I'm George Hamilton. I'm the Director of Product Marketing with ChaosSearch. I'm joined by Brian Bost, who's a sales engineer with ChaosSearch. A little bit about me, I've been with ChaosSearch for, since May, so actually not that long. Prior to that, I was an industry analyst for a number of years covering management software, virtualization, cloud services, and computing. And I've worked in a lot of different tech jobs at a lot of big companies like EMC, as recently with Cloud Health. So this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. And we'll get into some of the challenges associated with cloud services logs and how to handle today's huge volume and the variety of all these logs. Brian, want to give a short intro to yourself?
Yeah, thanks, George. Yeah, so my name is Brian Bost. I also started in May, so I started right alongside George here. Prior to joining ChaosSearch, have pretty wide background in I'll call it SRE methodologies, DevOps, doing some cloud migrations, cloud architecture there. So really lived through a lot of the pain that some folks experience in those sort of roles, and happy to help folks understand how ChaosSearch can help them avoid a lot of that pain.
Thanks, Brian. Really appreciate that. It's great having kind of a reformed SRE with ChaosSearch. It's really helpful because again, you've lived that life, and is this you? You're in the middle, in between the suits, right? Slave to the pager, getting called in, at nights, weekends, missing your kids' birthdays or other holidays. You're getting screamed at from the executives that they want to support all these new cloud initiatives, more migrations. To do that, they need more data available. At the same time, it's like store more data, but keep the cost down. And then you have the compliance teams yelling at them about compliance and maintaining access control to all of that data. And then, of course, the users are on the other side saying, it's why does it take me forever to get access to the data I need? Every time I want to ask you a question, I've got to go to your team and ask you to, somehow get this data in a format that's useful for me. And you're throwing your hands up in the air like it's taking all your time just to keep Elasticsearch from crashing or bringing it back up once it has. And now you're asking me to build a bunch of pipelines, do analytics on all these new applications, all these new cloud services are deployed, and you're not giving me any people or money to do it. So I'm sure that's the world you've lived in, right, Brian?
Yeah. And, to be honest, I can't tell you how many family events that I missed. My wife often reminds me of how many of those or how many lost nights of sleep I've had. So it's really, all kidding aside, it's a very challenging position for these support folks, SREs, DevOps folks to be in. It's often a balancing act that they need to play. But the good news is, it is something that we can truly help with and really improve the quality of life for a lot of these folks.
Yeah, if nothing else, and we should put that in our marketing literature, right? And stop giving all these value propositions. We improve your quality of life.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the thing, right? Is all of this comes down to you're losing insights. You're not able to tap the data that you want that can drive those business decisions, right? And the big thing is it's not just the volume, but it's log sprawl. Because with all these migrations, these new cloud services, we have microservices architecture and containers, the systems are more distributed. We're constantly building new data pipelines. So we talk about the 3 V's with volume, velocity, and variety and all that, but it's also just the sprawl that results from how what cloud architecture is like. And on top of that, you've got all these, the old joke is, right, the great thing about standards is there's so many to choose from, right? And there's a lack of standard in formats for logs, right? And you have all these different custom applications. JSON's now become kind of the de facto standard, but JSON is also highly customizable. So yeah, it's a de facto standard, but then you customize it so much that you basically render it non-standard. And it can include a lot of nested fields and nested arrays that can actually make it really difficult to perform analytics on it without exploding the size of your data. You've got things like fields, columns dropped and added, data types change upstream, and that affects everything downstream. And you end up with, instead of a nice data lake, you've got a data swamp, right? Because you've got all these pipelines, you have all this data prep that needs to happen. And now all of a sudden you can't get value out of all that data you've stored because of all those different, those complex pipelines, limitations on data, having to aggregate, normalize, correlate all these different sources before you can even do anything with them. And then you have all these different analytics tools, your BI tools, your SIM tools, APM, NPM, observability, etc. That it makes it a mess to get any kind of real value out of all your data. Like, why is this so hard? Well, this is kind of an image of, just looking at it's all the different formats and everything. And again, I mentioned also just how distributed the architectures get, and you have log sprawl now. But really on the right-hand side, it's like the big thing. This is an example of JSON, right? We have multiple levels, nested fields, these parent-child relationships underneath. It gets really hard if you start customizing JSON to know what kind of fields are important to you and what to keep, how to keep it, and what questions to ask. In addition to full text with hundreds of different formats, and you have different table formats. But this is what makes it so hard to extract value out of the data. Is it's very, very difficult to get this in one place and be able to just do analytics on it without having to do a lot of cleaning and prep work.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add there, George, too. I mean, in addition to, like it says right there, like hundreds of formats. I mean, that's true, right? We have all these variety of formats, and now there's a big push, right? Folks are moving to distributed systems, containerized frameworks, right? So now it's not only an explosion of the amount of formats that are out there, but they're coming from so many sources. I mean, talking about needle in a haystacks. I'm not sure how many haystacks that this really causes out there. So having any sort of those blind spots and loss of insights into that data, that's really going to make it difficult for a lot of these folks to really drill down into the root cause and get to the bottom of whatever issue they're troubleshooting at hand.
Exactly. And speaking of the troubleshooting piece, right, this is kind of a the typical DevOps analytical workflow, and this isn't rocket science in any way, right? What we do up front is we detect things first, right? You identify those potential issues. And how do you do that? Well, you have alerts and dashboards. You kind of know what you're looking for and set alerts for it, or set policies and thresholds and trigger notifications when thresholds are exceeded or when certain conditions go red. And so you're analyzing things that you primarily know, and the database structure is typically time series. Now, from there, when you move on to kind of the hunt or the exploration phase of this, now you are starting to look across all those different sources across the whole life cycle for that particular issue. And how you do that is you go through kind of a discovery process. So you're typically using a search database for that because you're looking for things that are unknown to you. And then from there, you analyze that and then develop responses. So you analyze what did you find? First, you detected things. Then you did the search to dig into that issue deeper. And you visualize what you found. You now take your unknowns, you convert them into knowns. That's typically done with a relational database. And then the end state where you get to your monitoring or your reporting. So now, based on what you've learned, you create new alerts and create new dashboards so that you can detect those things in the future. And now you're basically analyzing new knowns. And that's a combination of using both time series and or relational databases. But the point is that you have IT and DevOps users. They would really prefer to have a single platform solution for this, but the databases that are used for them are optimized for different things. And so, and there was actually, and I'll give a shout out to SiliconANGLE right now because they actually just came out with a report that I'd recommend you read. It was with the ETR, their research, independent research team as well, had a really good report on just how fragmented the observability market is right now. There's so many different tools, and while all of them promise to do pretty much everything, the truth is that depending on where they came from, were they initially a cloud native solution, or did they start on premises and move to the cloud? All of those different tools they have their strengths and weaknesses, and there isn't really a tool that's going to be one size fits all and do everything for you. And a lot of it is spelled out right here. The fact is that databases and the infrastructure supporting these different aspects of an analytical workflow are specialized for certain things.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add here too, in my experience, a lot of times teams, they don't have multiple tools, right? And like you hit the nail right on the head in the beginning when you said, like, the cost constraints, right? Because they're not going to have, a tool for all of those like items here. So a lot of times they're in a box essentially with whatever tool that they have, which is good for that use case, right? But then when they have to do something else, then they're trying to get that, the square peg through the round hole. And one of the things that, and it really attracted me to ChaosSearch to come here is, we address that by having this multi-model access into that data. So they don't have to be, confined into that box anymore with our platform. And they can use whichever methodology fits them at that given time based on the task at hand.
Very cool. Really important point, Brian. And so, how do most companies try to address this today, right? Because there isn't one tool that can really effectively do all of it as much as they may be positioned doing that. And so typically your observability tools, your application and network performance monitoring and management is your one platform for your most recent real-time operational data. And they're very good for that, right? So their focus, right, is monitoring applications, and they focus on detecting issues before they affect the application or the users. And so they're excellent for real-time detection. They're also like really strong embedded workflow functionality. But where we talk to a lot of customers and where they struggle is when you start to get analytics at scale. They typically do put a cap on how much data you can retain, or if there isn't a cap, it just gets really expensive after a while. That can make the hunt phase in the workflow really challenging. So your troubleshooting is simply not as effective. And so most organizations complement that with some form of centralized log management because it has much stronger search capabilities, and it's generally built for longer term retention. It's more effective to do that. The challenge for those platforms, however, is that, especially, make note of, specifically like an Elasticsearch, whether it's a managed service or whether you're implementing it on premises, the compute and storage is tightly coupled. The index is based on Lucene, which is pretty old. And so we're using a decades-old technology to solve, very, very current data volume problems. And it makes it very expensive to scale. It's difficult to manage. It gets brittle at scale too. And as Brian, I know you can speak to this from your previous experience, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll echo the same thing. Right? I've used APM observability tools in the past, and they're great for those types of use cases, right? They offer a lot of value to get a certain level of insight into applications and infrastructure, but those strengths, and the intent behind those aren't really around large data sets, long-term retention, having strong log searching capabilities. And again, especially in that realm of like long-based tail log search, when you have to look over, large sets of data over time. And on top of that, it's very expensive with those folks to retain the data because that's not their use case. And they also, on top of it being expensive, they own your data, right? Once you send it into them, it's theirs, they own it. We have a complete different approach here, right? We don't want to own the customer's data. It's their data. They should retain ownership. They should retain control over it. And we allow that also at a very, cost-effective way as well. So I think it's a good complement to some of those, to fill in a lot of those gaps that they may have over there.
Exactly. It's really about, using the right tool for the job, right? And log management is not good for that really fast real-time operational focus. And the real-time operational focused platforms struggle when you're doing things like search and longer-term retention.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I always like to ask this, the what if question, or imagine if. And honestly, one of my difficult jobs as a product marketer is to get people to believe certain things about the platform that we say you can do. But imagine if you never had to manually configure and provision your compute and storage, whether it's on premises or in the cloud. Imagine never having to manually configure that. Imagine never having to redistribute data to new nodes, or to have to manually resize your systems. What if you didn't have to own and manage your storage? Never have to duplicate data. What if you could eliminate all that difficult, complex integration to all those different upstream data sources? This is the issue of log sprawl, right? What if you never had to shard data or indexes or tables? You could eliminate partitioning tables, keys, random hash. What if you never had to materialize data for performance, or if you never had to deal with data skew and you never had to worry about backing up and restoring the actual analytics platform itself? Well, one, you'd eliminate a lot of toil. Brian, you've lived that world of toil, but the biggest thing is you become this big hero because the suit's on either side of you, right? Now you're never going to have to limit the business's ability to ask questions of your data because you are eliminate a lot of this toil and make more data available. So that's exactly what one of our customers did. So we like to use this quote from Joel Snook and the case study. You can read it on our website. And I'm not going to give you a big product pitch here, but the whole thing is he talks specifically about his SRE teams, and that was their working with his SRE teams. That was their big struggle, right? Just the log volume just continued to grow. They're supporting millions of users in real time, and they implemented ChaosSearch. And they have a single log management solution. And I love that point is like, we don't have to manage the logging tools as well as, log management generally. I don't have to worry about the tools. It just works. And it works by keeping everything in your cloud object storage and basically making your cloud object storage a hot analytical data lake. One of the reasons I joined ChaosSearch when I was, meeting with the executive team, when I was at EMC, I was the product marketing person for their object storage, which at the time was being used by cloud service providers and some large enterprises that were deploying object storage. And the big thing I think that happened at the time was just, cloud object storage is just positioned as a slow archive of stuff you don't access very often. It's just cheap, deep, very efficient, low-cost storage. And it's where I throw stuff that I can't throw away, but I don't have to do a lot of reading and writing to it. And I don't have to access it. So performance isn't a big deal. It's just known as cold, slow storage. And when I joined ChaosSearch, and they basically showed me how the platform worked and how the index makes cloud object storage performant as an analytics platform, I was blown away by that. And all of a sudden, all my preconceived notions of what object storage can do are thrown out the window, and that you can actually use your cloud object storage as a hot analytical data lake. An analytical platform that can do search and SQL and ML coming up. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but this kind of presents the before and after view, right? And this was very similar to what companies like Blackboard went through and a couple others, right? You have an elk stack, and the problem is because compute and storage are so tightly coupled, you end up building a very complex distributed architecture in order to help scale the platform for all the different analytics users. And what ends up happening is, you don't get the retention benefits of using Elastic. It's expensive to scale because you have to scale compute and storage in a very tightly coupled manner. The management configuration is a real hassle. And because of the way it's architected, downtime is pretty frequent. It's just very unstable at scale. Even as a managed service, if you've been using like a cloud-based Elasticsearch service, you know that if that service goes down, it's still a lot of work to bring it back up. And you end up with all these different data silos because of everything listed above. So if you've worked with it, you're probably very familiar with that. What ChaosSearch does is say, nope, put it all in your cloud object storage. We have a published Elastic API. And now you can get rid of all the complexity on the left-hand side and have a much simple, cleaner approach with everything in one place, index it once, connect to ChaosSearch to the platform, and then start doing analytics on it with an embedded Kibana distribution with the platform and supporting the Elastic API. So your users don't have to change how they interact with the data. You just simplify the log architecture tremendously.
Yeah, and it's funny, George, right? Like, maybe a while back, the question would be, how big is your elk cluster? Right now, it's not so much how big is it; it's how many do customers have, and because of that sprawl, now that data is all siloed, right? And folks aren't having full visibility into that entire data set, right? And that's a specific problem. When you look at the the diagram on the right there, that's a problem that we solve right there. And in addition to that, since we're stateless and we're built upon that cloud object storage, as opposed to some technologies that are a couple decades old, that the maintenance is gone. Planning shards, and that's an exercise. Shard planning, it's not something that teams just do once. That's something that has to constantly be revisited as those clusters grow. And then on top of that, just the overall support of the cluster, that's all completely removed with the Chaos Search platform. So there truly is an easy button here for a lot of those folks feeling some of that pain.
Yeah, really good point, Brian. So a little bit about the platform, but not to go heavy into the pitch, because we have some things about JSON and and inner joins of logs coming up in a couple slides, which I think will be really revealing, especially around the JSON stuff. But before we get to that, I just want to talk a little bit about how this works, to give some context to how we also help you handle things like very customized nested JSON. But what we're trying to present here is that you can build a unified data lake that can support analytics at scale, and everything stays in your cloud object storage. And there's three core components to the platform, right? There's the Chaos Fabric, the index, and the refinery. And the index is kind of the core foundational IP of the Chaos Search platform. And so the Chaos Index is really, really unique, patented, and it creates a 10 to 20x compressed representation of all of your data within your cloud object storage. And the Fabric is the stateless architecture that Brian just alluded to, right? Where it's completely decoupled compute and storage. So you have a very, very scalable, resilient compute and storage fabric that is much less expensive as well at scale. So working in conjunction with the index, you've now taken your cloud object storage and made it a performant analytics platform that supports, again, the Elasticsearch API, SQL APIs, and coming soon, machine learning. And then the Chaos Refinery is actually the component of the platform where you actually virtually clean and prepare your data for analytics. It's where you can go in and create virtual views. So you basically eliminate data pipelines. I don't have to do all that data prep at ingest and have to re-index data later, or manage a bunch of complex pipelines. You do it virtually in the refinery. It's a really powerful component of the platform. Being able to just ingest all your data once, index it, have massive scale by virtue of the Fabric, but then using the refinery to create all the different analytical views, and then again exposing these open APIs for all these different data consumers so that they can interact with the data as they see fit. So you get this one data lake platform that you can do for analytics, supporting different use cases because it's multi-model. You significantly reduce the storage costs without losing any of the vitality of your data. And it's simple, again, because there's no data movement, there's no ETL, there's no transformation, everything is done virtually in the refinery. I have no more data pipelines. I don't have to move data. And talk to any executive about that. And one of the biggest pains for them is data movement. It creates governance issues, security issues. It creates duplicate data. Now I don't have to worry about that because I never have to move the data. It stays in my cloud object storage and I interact with it virtually. And I'm not managing schemas anymore, but as I mentioned, eliminating sharding. I'm not managing a complex infrastructure, and my users get to use all the same analytics tools they've always used. And again, we've had some customers compared to like an on-premises Elasticsearch cluster they reduced their costs like 80%. It was just nuts.
Yeah, and another thing that's important to highlight, and you did touch on it a bit, is just the overall simplicity. Because a lot of times, and we heard a lot, like this is just too good to be true, but it's really how we operate. And I think, and that's the feedback we get from a lot of our customers. As they start implementing it, they do, come back to us and say, oh, how easy it was to implement, how quickly they were able to get that ROI on the platform. But I think it's because we're able to do this because we're not built on these older technologies. So a lot of times folks come into seeing something like this and like, all right, this is hard to do. It's gonna be complicated to do. I mean, it literally is easy. Get your data into your cloud object storage. We connect to it within a couple minutes, and there it is, right? There's none of that pipeline. There's literally nothing else that they need to do, to really get the value out of the platform. So that simplicity is truly key. And a lot of times folks say, they don't believe it, but after using it for a couple of days, they're like, wow, I get it. it's nice feedback that we get a lot from the customers.
Yeah, throw it in your object storage, you connect the platform to it, and just begin to analyze it and do everything virtually. Yeah. So again, the architecture is what kind of brings that together. I touched upon this a little bit, right? The indexing and compute's patented. So again, up to 20x compressed representation of your data. Automatically detect schemas, auto data discovery. And again, because we have decoupled compute and storage, it scales massively. And again, it all runs in your cloud. All the data metadata is in your cloud object storage, the stateless fault tolerant architecture, right? So it's, and again, creating those virtual only views. And again, published the open APIs so that, users can still continue to use the tools they want and use. So again, the cost, performance, and scale, again, that the idea of never having to move data anywhere. And again, not having to change behavior, even though you're going to create a much simpler architecture.
Yeah, and I think this, I really like this, the information on this slide here, because these are a lot of the benefits that are going to address a lot of the firefighting issues that teams experience. Like Elastic, for instance, they often recommend a completely separate elk cluster to monitor their production cluster. I mean, the last thing you need is more tech debt within your environment and a monitoring system to monitor your monitoring system. Me personally, if I need a monitor for my monitor, in my mind, that should be a pretty large red flag for that particular solution. With all the benefits that we have here, that that is actually something that you do not need. We're not going to say you need ChaosSearch to monitor ChaosSearch.
Right. That's a really good point, right? So now we've kind of given you a little bit of the broader challenges, how ChaosSearch kind of uniquely solves them. But there are new and emerging challenges coming all the time. The platform is not, it's not going to stay that we're constantly adding new capabilities to the platform. And two of the things that we've just noted recently, right, especially with the volume of, cloud services and applications that rely on all these different log sources. These are some of the things that a lot of our customers are telling us that they have a real hard time trying to process this. And we have some unique capabilities for this that are coming very, very soon. And the first thing is being able to join or combine different log sources together. And of course, JSON. So in the first thing, especially the nature of the architecture right now is that the different teams, whether it's IT, dev, or SecOps, they need to be able to combine data from these different log sources and do it in a simpler way to be able to either isolate a threat that can cross the boundaries of different systems, or to look for wherever the performance bottleneck may be and what may be causing it. And if you aren't able to combine those log sources together, it hurts your troubleshooting. Being able to query logs from different data sources, it requires aggregation, denormalization before you can get those logs into a single object store. Even with the ChaosSearch platform, being able to get into a single object storage before you can do any analysis on it. And when these constant requests for new pipelines come from all these new questions that people want to ask, the basic way that you solve for this today is you do it via the log shippers, or you build a pipeline. And you have to do a lot of that work up front to transform that log data from those different sources before you ingest and index it. And we'll show you what kind of the challenge of that approach is. It's limiting. On the JSON side, again, for a lot of customers that have simple field structures, this may not be as big an issue for them. But as you adopt more and more log sources, more cloud services, more applications that drive more log volume and more variety of log volume, JSON's going to become a bigger problem, even if it isn't today, because of how customizable it is. So you may have nested fields, nested arrays, and it can lead to huge data growth if you try to structure that for analytics, depending on how you do it. Or you can, if you really don't want to lose insights, it can explode the volume of your data. Whether you're flattening it or unflattening, doing it vertically, horizontally, however you want to try to structure your JSON, again, it can result in huge increase in the size of the data. Or if you try to keep it fairly simple, it necessitates really complex queries. So today, you need to know what the relevant fields are for analytics in advance to make, to prep JSON data via that pipeline. That's essentially how customers try to deal with it today, right? I mean, they're going to data engineer it, they're going to do a point search. So data engineer is basically going to create a data pipeline and pre-process it so that I only store what's relevant for that particular query or analysis. Or I do a point search and I keep my data volume down by basically looking at less data. I look at a specific point in time or specific information. Less than ideal in both cases. And so specifically to, trying to bring together different log sources the way you do it today, right? To combine or join these different sources and understand the relationships of those different sources. They have to be aggregated, they have to be denormalized and shipped to a single object store. This is even with the ChaosSearch platform. Our customers came back to us and said, this is something that would be valuable for us, because today there's really no flexibility after the fact. Once you've gotten it into a single object store, you index it, you can't change that. And so every time I have a new question, I've got to go back and create a new pipeline. And that can take days, weeks, even months, depending how bad your backlog is. But now ChaosSearch is going to be coming out very soon with the ability to do inner joins within the Chaos Refinery. So I kind of described the Chaos Refinery before, right? This is where you go to virtually clean, prep, transform your data for analysis. So a new feature being added to that is the ability to do inner joins within the Chaos Refinery. So this will allow you to collapse those pipelines. Now just ingest the raw data into multiple object stores and let the refinery do that work. So now I can go into the refinery and I can do dynamic conditional transforms. I can join different data sources into a single view. For examples include different index patterns, relational tables. The big thing is like I've eliminated those pipelines. So for the DevOps person, the SRE, the person who's the Elasticsearch admin, I've eliminated that pipeline for them, taken a lot of toil away. And what I've done for the business users is we'll give them a lot of flexibility to experiment with the data. Not every new question results in a new pipeline. I can actually just do that within the refinery, look at data in different ways and combine them in different ways. Some of the examples for that, right? Being able to join different data sources within the refinery. So as one example, right, I may want to view service startup events in EC2 logs along with service access request failures in the CloudTrail logs. Allows me to get to the root cause faster. Performance monitoring is another example, right? So I might want to combine the web request response latency that I see in ELB logs with service level events for individual services in my CloudWatch logs. And that helps me find and isolate bottlenecks in the design. For network traffic analysis, right? I want to join IP addresses in my ELB logs with location data for IP address ranges in my CSV files. And that can give me more insight into the behavior of my users and detect different types of patterns, maybe end user distribution by region. A big use case, of course, is around security, because, of course, security uniquely, you need to be able to bring together different data sources, because a persistent threat that can last, months will touch a lot of different systems. So an example here is like you create a view to correlate events in your ELB logs, your CloudTrail logs, and any other imported log files you have, create them as a static index. And this helps me, mitigate threats more effectively, because now threat hunters can get that holistic end-to-end view when they're hunting, doing forensic, or doing threat hunting beforehand, or forensics to investigate a security incident. So these are just a sampling of some of the use cases of being able to join these different data sources and without having to create a pipeline to do so. So now the nested JSON analysis, and this is something that customers either go crazy about, or if they this is like a huge problem for some companies. Other companies who kind of know their fields and they don't have complex JSON, it may not be a big issue today, but it could become one very soon. So this is an example, and it's using a security example, but you could imagine this for performance monitoring as well. But you can see the complex structure of the JSON log here on the left-hand side, right? And there are a lot of different questions you might want to ask these logs, right? So if I want to check the source IP address of authenticated users with root privileges for blacklisted IPs, look at all the different fields I have to look at, 1, 3, and 6. If I want to check what the user did, I've got to look at fields, my analysis needs to include fields 5, 7, 8, and 9. and so on through here, right? If I want to check what the other things the same user accessed around that same time, it's looking at fields specifically 2 and 4. If I just want to look for anomalous activity in the system that happened around that same time, that's another field I'm looking at. If I want to check what other things the root user and new users accessed, again, I'm looking at other fields. So as I mentioned earlier, the general approach is one of two things, right? I'm doing data engineering. So data engineering would have to build a pipeline for each of those analysis up above. So that's 5 pipelines already at least, because they need the data at different nested levels. Or again, the other thing is I treat it as a string and then I lose all those insights from all those different fields. So that's no good. Or I can do a point search. And again, if I do a point search and I limit myself to a specific point in time and specific fields, then I lose some of that stuff, like being able to look for like that anomalous activity that happened in the system around the same time. So it's a real challenge to be able to analyze a complex file like this without exploding the data. ChaosSearch actually is coming out with a scalable solution to this problem, right? So because the technology that we have, it is a patented approach that allows customers to actually just store their raw JSON and then analyze it as if it's structured at those different nested levels. So you store all the logs in their full native format, you index everything once. As I mentioned earlier, right, we have this massively compressed representation of your data. So you can index everything once, you keep everything without having to throw stuff out, without having to weed out fields. And I can then dynamically select what I want to explore, what kind of queries I want to ask after indexing. So I can go in again in the Chaos Refinery, and I can dynamically select specific nesting level and create virtual views. So now I can keep all of that data efficiently, keep it compactly, and I don't lose the insights that I'm looking for. So now you can explore all your JSON data dynamically. You can optimize for size, you can optimize for query structure, and you're not going to blow the amount of data, your data volumes like crazy if you try to flatten this file out and increase the number of rows or columns and just have a massive increase in the amount of log volume that you have. Again, index it once and then use the Chaos Refinery to dynamically interact with the data.
Yeah, and, oh, excuse me. And George, I think, the last few slides that we just went through here, I think all of those items, we roll them all up, it's, around that joining that log data and the types of challenges that we solve. That's going to directly address a lot of the issues that many SREs and just support teams in general need to solve, right? The ability to join that data from all sources, having all the data together is going to remove all those blind spots that they may have. And, if they have those siloed environments, which is going to help teams quickly get to the bottom of the issues and address the root cause of the problem. You don't have to play swivel chair, look at data in this silo, go over there, try to manually correlate it. That's just a nightmare to have to do that. And oftentimes when you have that data you're trying to manually correlate, then you have 2 different people maybe correlating the same data, you get different answers sometimes, right? And sometimes that delays that root cause analysis. The other thing is this also really future-proofs the solution, right? With the JSON flattening, like you said, that might not be a challenge for certain teams today, but down the road that might be. When that comes up, they don't need to go out and procure a new solution. And then all that hard work that they have done in terms of, migrating data or things like that, they don't have to worry about, taking data and loading off to another place. It could stay with ChaosSearch for that entire time that they need it. Also with the scale that we have, right? It's not going to outgrow anything that we have. And the post-index transformation that you touched upon, no one has a crystal ball, and no one ever is. I mean, there's a lot of planning that goes into it, but if someone said, well, what are you going to need from your data a year from now? You can make some educated guesses, but there's always going to be some edge cases because there's going to be those unknown unknowns. Being able to transform that data after it's been indexed without having to, re-index it all is huge, right? And that alone is an enormous time saver right there. So I think we can address a lot of those sort of challenges that folks are seeing.
Yeah, really good point. You live that world. And so we're positioned very complementary to your APM, NPM observability platform, right? As cloud infrastructures get more and more complex, they're also interconnected. Again, we have this log sprawl from all these different applications and different cloud services being deployed. it's really, putting these two things together to give you this 360-degree view, right? So use your APM and observability platforms to monitor applications, focus on detecting those issues, the real-time detection. And then ChaosSearch is built for cost-performant analytics at massive scale. So this is where you can have your unlimited data retention, so you can analyze more data over a longer period of time to really optimize your analysis. And or threat hunting, or looking at just patterns that develop over a longer time horizon that do it at a much lower cost. You may be throwing data away that is valuable because you just can't affordably keep it, and we eliminate that problem. Keep it for as long as you need to in your low-cost cloud object storage, but still be able to analyze it effectively in a performant way. So you're complementing, your APM, NPM observability platforms with ChaosSearch, so that your cloud native architecture has, you're able to maintain that visibility into it even as it grows. And to wrap it up, again, the way we position this is trying to we present kind of that full workflow for that we showed earlier, right? That analytical workflow, from troubleshooting to monitoring, and giving you that full analytics workflow, using your cloud native Kibana to do that, so that you can discover effectively and hunt for things, visualize those, create dashboards, alerting, all of those things. So we can do a lot of those things, but you still use maybe your observability platforms for doing your real-time operational stuff. But really, when you centralize all your logs in this, Brian's used that term future-proof a couple times, right? Because we will be able to, you'll be able to adapt no matter what gets thrown at you, because everything is staying in your cloud object storage, your S3 or your GC or your Google Cloud Storage. Very cost-effective, scalable. You control the storage, you own it, and you get all the features and functionality of that cloud storage platform. The completely stateless architecture, right? The 11 nines of durability, 5 nines availability, and everything being a fully managed service. So you do not have all of the management headache of having to provision compute storage and manage all of that. And again, it's really quick to get up and running with it. And analytics is just faster because you just put the data in your cloud object storage. ChaosSearch only has read-only access. You click to index. And now, because of the refinery, it's the future-proof part of that, right? You can just change how you view data on the fly whenever you need to, without having to build new pipelines for it. And again, fully governed and auditable. This is a big thing in the executive level, right? Data movement is bad. ETL, that, and having duplicate data in different places is very bad. It's costly, and as well as can be a compliance nightmare. And again, the pricing, we've got some customers that have achieved up to 80% reduction compared to an on-premises elk stack, but also getting 50% compared to public, a cloud service that's Elasticsearch. It's huge, just dramatic difference in TCO. And last, it's very easy to get a demo and even start a free trial. So we recommend that you do that. We also will have a presence at reInvent. If you're watching this webinar recording and it's before reInvent, definitely check us out at reInvent. You can actually speak and ask some questions. We'll be there in person, as well as we'll be in the virtual event as well. So however you want to interact with us, would love to hear from you. But again, you can go on the website today at chaossearch.io, and you can actually request a demo, and you can get started very easily with a trial, and would love to help you out with that. Get started very quickly in a few minutes. You don't have to move any data. It stays in your cloud object storage, and we can show you how easy it is to index your data and create a virtual view. Real simple. Brian, anything else to add before we wrap it up? Are we good?
No, I think we're good. I'll reiterate, like I mentioned earlier, the customers, seeing is believing. So I'll just reiterate, if you're on the fence, try it. It really is that easy to use.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And everybody, again, definitely recommend you go to the site, check us out at reInvent. Hopefully, you'll see in person in Vegas at a real person event, seeing people for the first time in like 2 years. We're looking forward to it. Thank you for tuning into the webinar, and hopefully we will see you soon.
A quick reminder that today's session was recorded. Following this webinar, you will receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand. You can also find the recording on the DevOps website. Just visit devops.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section. It will be waiting for you. Now on to the 4 winners of our $25 gift card drawing. Our first winner is Mike V. Congratulations, Mike. Our second winner is Dottie N. Congratulations, Dottie. Our third winner is Robert N. Congratulations, Robert. And our final winner is Dave B. Congratulations, Dave, and our other 3 gift card winners. George and Brian, thank you again so much for taking the time to put together this program and demo. And I'd also like to thank you, our audience, for being with us for the entirety of the presentation. This is Cody J. Brown signing off. Have a great day, everybody.